Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Interweb Studios, and today we will listen to some stories where OP gets revenge on some Karens. Timestamps are down below if you want to skip around the video, and with that out of the way, sit back and enjoy. As a teenager, I worked as a checker/bagger for a large local grocery store chain. One busy Sunday, I was bagging at a register and a regular Karen came through the line. She had a large order and items started piling up quickly while I bagged. As I'm working, Karen is very carefully watching my every move with a scowl on her face. Her loaf of bread comes down, followed by a small bunch of bananas. The bananas barely touch the bread, which activates full Karen mode. OMG, you smooshed my bread. Oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am. Although I don't see any damage. No, right there, it's ruined. You need to go back and get me a new loaf of bread right now. I happily reply, "Okay, sure thing," and walk away with the bread, leaving the rest of her order piling up. I slowly circled the store a few times, stopping to chit-chat with some co-workers. About 10 minutes later, I walked back up to the front of the store without swapping out her bread for a new loaf. When I get back to the front, I see Karen standing behind the register with her things bagged up and waiting for me. "Here you go, ma'am," I said with a smile as I handed her the exact same loaf of bread. "That's much better," she muttered as she took the bread and put it in her basket.
Got him! Got him!
Had she not been so rude, or if the bread had actually been damaged, I would have swapped it out in about 30 seconds. The rest of my day was great, although I felt bad for the checker who had to bag the remainder of her order, because of course she couldn't touch it herself. I was on an airplane, and right when we landed, a Karen in the back unbuckled and darted to the front of the plane to get off first. She did not make any eye contact and felt that she was special. In talking about going from the very last seat on the plane, down the whole row and past first class, basically standing at the little kitchen thing in the front. All this time the seatbelt sign was still on and we were still rolling down the runway. The flight crew had asked her to return to her seat until we reached the gate, but she was not even responding. Everyone was basically trying to just wait it out. It was a long flight, 8 hours, and at this point we were exhausted anyways. Nobody said a word. Suddenly the captain announced we had a special guest on board and he will be coming out to greet after we were settled at the gate. The Karen stood there awkwardly until we did the whole rolling into the gate and whatever planes do when they land for about 15-20 minutes. Everyone sat there waiting to see what the captain was talking about. Eventually the captain came out and asked the lady to please move back a little to get to his special guest. Then a little more. Then a little more. He was looking from row to row trying to find a specific person. Everyone is watching and looking around to see who it could be. He kept going and going, asking the Karen to please step back a few more steps each time. Finally, as they approached the rear of the plane, he asked her to sit for a second while he grabbed the intercom at the rear of the plane. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to announce our special guest sitting in seat 42C. Let's give her a round of applause." The whole plane went wild with laughter and applause. I loved every moment of that. As I was writing about my mom selling her home to a Karen, it made me remember her other awful neighbor. The backstory. So my parents' log home and hobby farm was along the shore of a private lake, one of only 16 left in our province, I believe. We are in Canada, and one of our neighbors was a nasty German fellow who owned property across the lake. He didn't have a residence there, just a shack for recreation. His property also included the lake bottom, so he believed that he owned the water above it as well. Years ago, he had an argument with the previous owner and strung a chain link fence across the lake to section off his property. One call to a conservation officer and he was told he had 5 hours to remove it or it would be removed and he would be sent a bill. He removed it. The previous owner came to an understanding with him that allowed him to put a pump in the lake to collect water. Well, he changed his mind, and so the previous owner put the pump on some small float so it was a few inches off the lake bottom, like the construction side of that. So this lovely neighbor would stare at our property with binoculars to make sure we weren't on his lake bottom and stealing his water. We got really tired of him peeping as he would look directly in my bedroom window, which didn't have curtains as it was high up in the loft on the side of the house. I would go outside and yell at him to stop starting, and he would reply that he was just checking to see if we were stealing his water. I noticed my daughter and nephew were jumping on the trampoline in their bathing suits, so I called the RCMP and reported a strange man with binoculars was staring at our kids in their bathing suits. The female officer, who arrived rather quickly, was shown a picture of him with the binoculars. She went across to his property and told him if they ever got a call about him peeping again, he would be charged. He kept screaming he was watching the water, but she cut him off and said no more peeping. That, folks, was the last peep we heard out of him. There are two different stories here. So this happened 4 years ago. My parents sold their hobby farm in the country. Unfortunately, they sold it to Karen and Chad, who had never lived in the country before. If you live in the country, you tend to band together with your neighbors as everyone helps everyone else. Unfortunately, my dad passed away after the conditions were lifted and before we moved out. My dad handled all maintenance. My mom tried to get the deck restrained to make it look nice for the new owners. The guy we hired to do it refused to do the work because the deck was original to the home and approximately 30 years old. It had outlived its useful life and wasn't up to code as it was constructed with nails and not screws. One of the boards was missing a chunk, etc. He said it was a waste of money to do that as the new owners were obviously going to have to rebuild the deck. Somehow, their glorious home inspectors never mentioned the rotting deck in his assessment. They moved in and invited my mom over for brunch. My mom moved next door. She came over expecting to have breakfast, and they instead asked for $25,000 to cover half of the cost of their new deck. My mom is an angel. In fact, we have nominated her for the Sovereign Medal for volunteers. My mom never wants to owe someone and always pays her bills in full and early. She was going to write them a check as she didn't want a neighbor to be upset with her and think she cheated someone. Me and my siblings absolutely refused to allow her to give them any money. Karen gets her lawyers to send a letter demanding $30,000, $25,000 for the deck, and $5,000 for her legal fees. I was so mad at them that I posted in the Facebook group for the area, asked for referrals for a real estate litigation lawyer as someone was trying to sue my mom. The community went crazy and I had 50 people who offered to write reference letter for my angel of a mom for court. I left the post up long enough that the community saw it and everyone knew who their new neighbors were. Part 2. Unintentional revenge. The school bus stop for our road was our driveway. My dad and some neighbors built a bus shelter beside the driveway for rainy days. Karen hates the look of the shelter at the end of the driveway and thinks it's tacky. She contacts the school board and asks them to remove it from her property. It's actually on the side of the road, which is under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Transportation. The school sends out an employee to assess the structure. Well, it turns out that since the structure wasn't constructed by a unionized employee, no unionized employee will touch it. Since it's not on her actual property, she would be fined if it was disturbed. So she had to look at it every time she comes home. P.S. Our lawyers, meanwhile, replied and asked for a copy of their proof that my mother intentionally committed fraud by not disclosing the deck as an issue and why they weren't suing the home inspector. Last line was, "Furthermore, we are talking about a 30-year-old deck." That was the end of that. To this day, no neighbor has ever plowed their 200-meter driveway, so they have to park their luxury vehicles at the end of their driveway and walk with their groceries up 200 meters in the snow. I hope